Broadcasting to our viewers in North America and around the globe. My name is Mike Hembley. Our top stories. 20 countries meet to step up pressure on North Korea, but neighbors and key players, China and Russia, are missing from the talks. Is Steve Bannon set to testify to a grand jury? Reports suggest the special counsel investigating links between the Trump campaign and Russia is now turning its sights on the president's former chief strategist. Confronted over 100 cases of sexual abuse, USA Gymnastics former doctor awaits sentencing as more and more victims speak out.
Girls don't stay little forever. They grow into strong women that return to destroy your world.
And a Californian couple are charged with torturing their 13 children. They were held captive close to starvation, some chained to their beds. Hello. Two foreign ministers from 20 countries have been meeting to try to exert concerted pressure on North Korea to give up its nuclear ambitions. Made up solely of countries which were involved in the Korean War more than half a century ago. But two key international players, North Korea's neighbors, Russia and China, are not there. A press conference has just got underway after the day's session of talks in Vancouver. The Canadian Foreign Minister, Chrystia Freeland, said all 20 countries agreed sanctions on North Korea would be strictly enforced.
The 20 nations represented here in Vancouver have agreed that we must work together to ensure that sanctions imposed on North Korea are strictly enforced. We also agree that we must take significant steps to keep North Korea from invading sanctions and to sever financial lifelines for the country's weapons of mass destruction. I do want to say clearly that we, as a group, harbor no hostility whatsoever towards North Korea or its people. We seek neither a regime change nor a collapse. What we do want is to resolve this crisis peacefully, to achieve what is in our collective best interest, and that is security and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said the U.S. is open to talks with North Korea, but only if it stops its threatening behavior.
The United States has always been open to clear messages that North Korea, and we have sent clear messages to North Korea that we are ready for serious negotiations. North Koreans know our channels are open, and they know where to find us. But a sustained cessation of North Korea's threatening behavior is a necessary indicator of whether the regime is truly ready to pursue a peaceful, diplomatic resolution to the security threat that it has created. Our nations must remain united on sustaining pressure until North Korea takes concrete steps toward and ultimately reaches denuclearization.
The U.S. Secretary of State. Let's speak now to Dr. John Park, Director of the Korea at the Harvard Kennedy School. I know you were listening to the press conference. Well, what do you make of it?
Well, Mike, it's encouraging to hear this kind of coordinated messaging coming from a multilateral group of countries. However, we have to look at the facts, and North Korea's nuclear weapons are far advanced. If the coordination of sanctions, reduction of North Korean evasion techniques on those sanctions are fully implemented, we're looking at a time lag that frankly is behind in terms of the North Korean pace of development. In 2017, North Korea was making advancements almost on a weekly and monthly basis.
And for all the words and presumably all the taxpayers' money involved in bringing these foreign ministers together, you have to wonder what the point is if China and Russia are not there. In fact, it may even have angered China, which is surely counterproductive.
The Chinese are very concerned. Right now, they feel that the way to go in terms of a diplomatic approach is what they call the freeze for freeze. North Korea would commit to freezing its nuclear weapons development activity. In return, the United States and South Korea would freeze their military exercises. However, as we saw, Secretary Tillerson shot down that proposal and is basically going down this path, which is, in many respects, the Bush administration game plan of what's called CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization.
Is there more hope, do you think, possibly from the direct talks between North Korea and South Korea, mostly at the moment, about the Winter Olympics, or are you not particularly optimistic even about those?
Any type of talks at this late stage of the game in terms of the crisis is welcome. However, I think it's really important to manage our expectations. It looks like, given the narrow focus on a successful Winter Olympics, North Korea and South Korea are limiting, in terms of the scope of these discussions, something that looks very much tactical. In the grand scheme of things, it looks like a pause rather than some kind of diplomatic off-ramp.
Under direct threats from President Trump, it did look for a while as if Pyongyang was trying to scale down the situation. Do you think, though, North Korean officials are likely to react to this meeting?
It's an important litmus test. The discussions are going on in parallel. They're having a third round of the inter-Korean talks to accelerate preparations. The Winter Olympics are right around the corner to get this North Korean delegation to Pyeongchang in South Korea. And we just saw this multilateral meeting in Vancouver. So the litmus test is knowing what South Korea said and committed to in this Vancouver multilateral meeting of foreign ministers, how this will impact the inter-Korean talks. If the North Koreans view the Winter Olympics as a very important international stage where they can unveil themselves as a nuclear weapon state, a legal nuclear weapon state, then I think they'll stick with the inter-Korean talks. If not, there's precedent of the North Koreans walking out of the talks and these type of talks in the past as well.
Dr. Park, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's being reported that Steve Bannon, President Trump's former chief strategist, has been summoned to testify before a grand jury. According to the New York Times, the first time a subpoena has been issued to seek information from a member of Mr. Trump's inner circle over alleged collusion with Russia in the 2016 election. Let's go to our correspondent David Willis in Washington. David, tell us more.
Well, up to now, of course, Mike, those who have given evidence to Robert Mueller's, the special counsel's investigation, have done so voluntarily, and there were dozens of them, in fact, in the final months of last year. Steve Bannon, though, by all accounts, does not intend to give evidence voluntarily. That may be because he knows so much about what went on, both during the transition and, of course, in the early months of the Trump administration. So the special counsel has subpoenaed him to give evidence to a grand jury that is looking into this whole affair of Russian meddling in the outcome of the 2016 election. There's a suggestion here that this might be all part of Robert Mueller's team seeking to get some leverage here with Steve Bannon. They desperately need his testimony. They need his evidence because of the amount that he knows. And by subpoenaing him and effectively forcing him to give evidence to the grand jury might open the door perhaps to a more congenial sit-down chat with the special counsel's team, which Steve Bannon would be able to have his lawyer present.
Because before a grand jury, of course, he wouldn't have a lawyer, would he? Said to be particularly interested in why Bannon described that meeting between the president's son and son-in-law and Russian representatives as treasonous.
Yes, indeed. That, and of course the firing of the former FBI Director James Comey. Now, it's thought that in both of those cases, Steve Bannon didn't play a large role, if indeed any role at all. He may not have been party to the discussions surrounding either of those two events, but that he might know something of value and of interest to the special prosecutor regarding the dismissal of the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who was eventually resigned after he was found to have lied to the Vice President Mike Pence. So early days, a lot to play out, but clearly the feeling that Steve Bannon's evidence is going to be pretty crucial, hence the need to effectively compel him to testify.
And just very briefly, David, any idea of a timescale when it might happen?
Well, a lot of conjecture. If you listen to the White House view of things, Mike, you would believe that Robert Mueller is about to come out with his conclusions any day now. But I think it's probably wishful thinking. This is clearly a very painstaking inquiry. Mr. Mueller is a man who's known for his thoroughness. He's clearly picking through all the evidence. Anybody's guess, really. It could be weeks, it could be months.
David, thank you very much for that. Well, President Trump has had some advice, been advised to eat a lower fat diet and take more exercise. This after his medical last Friday. But the White House doctor, Ronnie Jackson, told the press the president was generally in excellent health and had performed well in cognitive tests. Dr. Jackson expecting Mr. Trump to remain healthy for the duration of his presidency.
Can you explain to me how a guy who eats McDonald's and fried chicken and all those Diet Cokes and who never exercises is in as good a shape as you say he's in?
It's called genetics. I don't know. People have, just great genes. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old. I don't know. I mean, he has incredible genes. I just assume.
Dr. Ronnie Jackson there. Let's quickly round up some more of the main news for you. The Trump administration has suspended more than half its funding to the United Nations agency that supports the Palestinians. The US has informed the UNRWA it will deliver $60 million of this year's first instalment, but withhold the rest. The organization provides health care, education and social services to millions of Palestinians. The US Navy has said the former commanding officers of two of its destroyers involved in deadly collisions in the Pacific will face criminal charges. 17 sailors were killed in the crashes. The first collision in June, the USS Fitzgerald collided with a cargo vessel off the coast of Japan. 7 lives were lost, and 10 more when the USS John McCain hit an oil tanker east of Singapore in August. Pope Francis has been to a women's jail in Santiago on the second day of his visit to Chile. The women inside the San Joaquin prison are mostly mothers on drug trafficking charges. The trip overshadowed by multiple accusations of child sexual abuse against nearly 80 members of the Chilean clergy. Earlier, Pope Francis said he feels pain and shame over the scandal. International gymnasts have been confronting the former USA team doctor Larry Nassar in court and describing how he sexually abused them when they were children. Nassar was jailed last month for 60 years for possessing images of child abuse. He's now awaiting sentencing for offences he's admitted of sexual assault. As many as 125 women are expected to give evidence at the sentencing hearing in Michigan. Regina Vajanathan reports.
Her smile lit up the Olympics, and her performances won her 4 gold medals and worldwide acclaim. But through it all, Simone Biles hid a dark secret.
Olympic champion Simone Biles comes forward to say she was also sexually abused by former USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar.
Simone Biles is the most high-profile of Larry Nassar's victims. He's alleged to have abused more than 100 young girls. Biles said she knows she's not to blame for what happened and isn't afraid to speak out now. I love this sport much, and I've never been said. I won't let one man and the others that enabled him to steal my love and joy. In court today, Larry Nassar came face to face with some of the young women he abused at the start of a sentencing hearing. As they took their turn, they bravely told the court what he'd done to them.
There is no fault here.
Good morning. My name is Kyle Stevens.
Kyle Stevens was first abused by Nassar when she was just 6 years old.
Perhaps you have figured it out by now, but little girls don't stay little forever. They grow into strong women that return to destroy your world. I was 12 years old when I told my parents, when Larry rubs my feet, he uses his penis. Sitting on my living couch, I listened to you tell me, no one should ever do that, and if they do, you should tell someone. Well, Larry, I'm here. Not to tell someone, but to tell everyone.
Olivia Cowan suffered for years from Nassar's abuse. Now she's finally rebuilding her life and is a mother.
I will educate my children about monsters like you and pray to God they will never experience pain like this. There will be a day where I look into my soul and I will still see the scars of this nightmare. But I will no longer feel the deepness of their pain.
For the young women who shared their stories today here at court, this is also about accountability. How did Larry Nassar work as the team doctor for USA Gymnastics for nearly 2 decades and continue his abuse? And what did top officials know? One of those who won from the US Gymnastics team is Simone Biles' teammate Ali Reisman.
What did USA Gymnastics do and Larry Nassar do to manipulate these girls so much that they are so afraid to speak up?
As they performed before millions around the world, these young women were hiding the pain and trauma of abuse. After a day of emotional testimony, the world of gymnastics is now confronting its own Me Too moment. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Michigan.
Much more to come for you on BBC News, including this crisis in Cape Town. The worst drought in a century means water is running out fast.
Day one of Operation Desert Storm to force the Iraqis out of Kuwait has seen the most intense air attack since the Second World War.
Tobacco is America's oldest industry, and it's one of its biggest. But the industry is nervous of this report. This may tend to make people want to stop smoking cigarettes.
There is not a street that is unaffected. Huge parts of Kobe were simply demolished as buildings crashed into one another. This woman said she'd been given no help and no advice by the authorities. She stood outside the ruins of her business.
Tens of thousands of black children in South Africa have taken advantage of laws passed by the country's new multiracial government and enrolled at formerly white schools.
Tonight sees the 9,610th performance of her long-running play, The Mousetrap. When they heard of her death today, the management considered whether to cancel tonight's performance. But Agatha Christie would have been the last person to want such a thing.
Very good to have you with us on BBC News. The latest headline: 20 countries, led by Canada and the United States, have called for the strict enforcement of sanctions against North Korea. US media is reporting President Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, has been summoned to testify before a grand jury. Police in California have praised the courage of a 17-year-old girl who escaped from the home where she and 12 siblings, it's alleged, were being held captive by their parents. David and Louise Turpin, whose children range in age from 2 to 29, are due in court later this week. They've been charged with torture and child endangerment. The children were found in squalid conditions, some chained to their beds. James Cook reports from outside their home in Paris.
In public, they looked like a big, happy family, devoutly Christian. Renewing their wedding vows in Las Vegas, David and Louise Turpin played the part of proud parent. But in private, say police, the Turpins had a dark secret. Before dawn on Sunday, a 17-year-old girl escaped from this house through a window. She had taken a deactivated mobile phone and managed to use it to call the police. Inside, officers found her 12 brothers and sisters, dirty and malnourished. 3 were shackled to their beds with chains and padlocks. The home dark and foul-smelling.
I wish I could come to you today with information that would explain why this happened. But we do need to acknowledge the courage of the young escaped from that residence to bring attention so they could get the help that they so needed.
Neighbours say the Turpins were originally from West Virginia. The father was an engineer on a good salary but had twice declared bankruptcy. And neighbours now admit there were signs that something was amiss.
I never saw a scooter, I never saw a bike. I saw the infant maybe 3 times, maybe, and I never saw the infant again.
How did they look when you saw them?
They were always pale, like abnormally pale.
The children do look pale in pictures on Facebook. Here they're visiting Disneyland. Police say the siblings were so small that they were shocked to discover that 7 were actually adults, the eldest 29. They're now being treated in hospital.
They've gone through a very traumatic ordeal. I can tell you that they're very friendly. They're very cooperative, and I believe that they're hopeful that life will get better for them after this event.
This quiet Californian suburb is now under intense scrutiny. The authorities say they had no prior contact with the family, but neighbours are searching their souls, wondering if they could have saved the siblings sooner. As for David and Louise Turpin, they are under arrest, charged with torture and child endangerment. Doctors say they're determined to keep all 13 siblings out of the media spotlight. They're focused on feeding them to try to improve their physical condition and on offering them psychological help as they try to come to terms with their ordeal inside this home. Cook, BBC News, Paris in California.
Cape Town could become the first major city in the world to run out of water as soon as April. South African officials are warning the city's worst drought in living memory could force them to shut off taps and impose emergency rationing. Each person will get a maximum of 25 litres of water a day. Experts predict there's just over 90 days of water left now in the city. Sarah Corker has the story.
There may be water all around Cape Town, but little of it is drinkable. And the South African city is suffering its worst in more than a century. After 3 years of very low rainfall, Western Cape dams are now less than a third full. And the authorities have warned of a day zero, the date the taps run dry, predicted to come as soon as the 22nd of April. If that happens, there'll be emergency water rationing.
I do hope that the government is doing something to prevent day zero, because it will be a national crisis. It will be honestly horrific when day zero comes. It's going to be very scary. But I think it's a reality, unfortunately.
A reality that would make Cape Town famous for being the world's first major city to run out of water. Its 4 million residents already face strict limits on the amount of water they can use. There are bans on washing cars and filling up swimming pools. People are urged to shower for no longer than 2 minutes and to flush toilets as little as possible. Businesses are doing their bit to save water, but there's been some criticism of the government's approach.
Why are we looking at day zero? Are there no other alternatives other than to close up my hotel or switch off all the taps? There are alternatives, and there are countries in this world that have proven that there are ways to deal with drought and with desert regions. One has to look at the Middle East and see what Israel did to a desert there in respect of desalination.
South Africa is building desalination plants and drilling more boreholes, but officially, if down 13.5%, the water supply to Cape Town will be turned off. People here have been warned. Every drop counts. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
For 40 years, it's been a workhorse of the British Army, used in the Falklands, Northern Ireland, both Gulf Wars and Afghanistan. Well, now the Lynx helicopter has made its final flight before it's phased out. Duncan Kennedy was on board.
The last flight from the last of Britain's Lynx. RAF Odium in Hampshire, the starting point for today's farewell tour.
That's us now departing RAF Odium for the final flight for the Lynx.
This was a 500-mile goodbye circuit of all the bases connected to this iconic aircraft. A thank you to those who've flown it, fixed it, or just fascinated by it.
I love the old girl. She's very, we'll say, quirky. She's very manoeuvrable, and she's done us proud.
The airborne took the 4 Lynx helicopters first to Yeovilton in Somerset, the place where it was built. A last wave from the crew and from the people who made her. It was then on to Bristol, Leominster and Shawbury near Wolverhampton, where Lynx crews did their basic training. Some people even put out
goodbye to a historic and iconic aircraft after 40 years, of which I'm certain across the whole of the UK, from those that have flown it, it will carve out a really special part of their heart, and they will be sad to see it go.
Launched in 1978, the Lynx first saw major action in the Falklands War, going on to serve in the Gulf and Afghanistan. Its flexibility at the heart of its durability. In fact, it was so successful, Britain has sold more than 450 aircraft all around the world. But now, 40 years on, it's simply too old, and today is its last day of service. Its final performance was a formation down the Thames, in a last salute to this agile, fast, distinctive machine. A few years after it first flew,
and the final flight for the Lynx.
It's bye from the Lynx. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
Meteorologists in Russia have now confirmed that Moscow has had its darkest December on record. They say the sun shone for just 6 minutes in the whole month, an average of 18 hours. this gloom down to warmer than normal weather, generating cloud cover. The central Philippine province of Albay has declared a state of calamity because the Mount Mayon volcano is spewing lava. It's now reached the limits of a no-go zone and spread ash on nearby villages. The most active volcano in the Philippines has been erupting since Saturday. Back in 1814, this volcano buried a town and killed 1,200 people. Thousands have been evacuated this time, but as people have been fleeing their homes, about 25,000 have gone so far. Tourists have been descending on the area, coming in to watch this spectacular display. Just briefly, that main news again. A meeting of 20 foreign ministers has been looking at ways to try to curb North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. It's agreed to try to ensure that United Nations sanctions are strictly enforced. The Canadian foreign minister, who hosted the meeting in Vancouver, said they could not stand by as the nuclear threat on the Korean peninsula intensified. The US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said it was essential for UN member states, in particular China and Russia, to fully implement sanctions, but they were not at the meeting, crucially. Much more on the website. Thank you for watching.